Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. It's so good to come to you on the first Sunday of 2022. We're doing something special for the next couple weeks. We announced this on social media earlier in the week, but with the rise of the Omicron variant and the fact that DC is one of the places with the highest transmission rate and people have been traveling, over the holidays, we are pushing our in-person services couple of weeks into the middle of the month. So this Sunday, January 2nd, and next Sunday, January 9th, we're going to have online only services. And honestly, the main reason is hoping that, the Omicron variant kind of like dies down a little bit, but also to give enough time to everybody to get tested, to get the results from their test, so we can gather back together on the 16th. The hope is that, that we're all keeping each other safe and healthy. With that, the other thing that we announced during our Christmas celebration in December is that when we gather back, we're gathering back in our office space where I'm recording this right now, where we used to meet in the before time. So if you are one of the people that have been, tuning online and you've been maybe wanting to check us out and come join us in person, do it. We would love to have you on January 16th. We're going to start meeting still at 5 p.m. for the month of January. And then our hope is that once February comes, we can actually go back to having morning services. So lots happening in the next couple months here at Encounter, and we're excited for that. Now, with that, what I do in the next couple of weeks is we've been before, all the Christmas break, we were in this long series that we started on the life of Jesus, and we're calling it Jesus, the One and Only. And my goal is to take as long as this needs. It might be months, it might be maybe the whole of 2022, and take a look at every single aspect about the life of Jesus that we can. And right now it works great because it's kind of like the birth narratives of Jesus, kind of like the beginning of the Jesus story. And next Sunday is actually, if you come from a liturgical tradition, is what's considered Epiphany Sunday, when the church remembers the visit of the Magi, after Jesus is born. So we'll look at that next week. This week, though, I want to do something still connected to the life of Jesus that I think it's important. Last time we had one of these talks was for Christmas Eve. We didn't do anything for the 26th. We usually take last Sunday of the year off. But on the 24th, if you tune in, I put up like a short reflection about the meaning of the Christmas story, the implications of the Christmas story for our lives. And if you listen to that, if you haven't, I invite you to do it. I think the sermon is on our website, on our YouTube page or Facebook page, so you can check it out. But basically, the gist of what I talked about was that one of the things about the Christmas story is that for those of us who believe in Jesus, is this testimony of God's presence and God's solidarity with us in the midst of our pain and our suffering, right? We talked about how, last year was really hard. And in some ways, it was harder than 2020 for different reasons. And that in the midst of that, in the midst of a lot of the suffering that we see, one of the questions that we asked ourselves is, God, where are you? Because life oftentimes, most of the times, I would argue, is really hard. And actually, when you become a Christian or you are a Christian, you believe in God, that belief in God not always makes the fact that life is hard any easier. Actually, sometimes it makes it even harder, right? Because if you don't believe in God and life is hard, well, that's just reality. Life is hard. But you believe in God, all of a sudden you have this being that you believe is all powerful and that you believe is benevolent, and that, people tell you that he loves you. And you look sometimes at your life, or you look around at the suffering of other people. And the natural question to ask is, well, God, where are you? Like, why is this happening, right? We looked at this verse in the book of Job, where Job was probably like the most famous sufferer in the scriptures. Ask God, where are you? And he calls God, you tireless watcher of humanity, which is very, very strong language that he uses for God. But the point Job is trying to make is like, can you see that we're suffering, right? And as Christians, that's an important question. How does what does God do about our pain and our suffering? And what we looked at is that Jesus is God's response to that. The Bible doesn't offer easy answers about why there is suffering in the world. What the Bible does is actually offers us God himself, that Jesus coming to earth is God stepping into our story and sitting with us in the midst of our pain. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little concerned about that sermon because sometimes it can come across, I don't know how to say, like a little emo, if that makes any sense. Because, it's very like, life is really hard and there's no easy answers, but, God is with us. And I'll be honest, one of the reasons why I share that with you is because I know that for some of you, watching this, life has been really hard. For me, life has been really hard in 2021. For our church community, life has been really hard in 2021. So, there is a comfort that, escapes the easy answers. I'm a little, to be honest with you, allergic to a kind of preaching that can seem like a little bit too optimistic, but it doesn't dig deep into the causes of our suffering. And that's basically like just kind of like whitewashes it a little bit. Like, hey, life is hard, but you don't know like what God is doing in the midst of that. God is working, God is changing you, or that, preaching that like works in cliches, right? Like, God gives his toughest battles to his greatest soldiers. So you're special if something bad is happening to you. Like, God is preparing you for something and you just wait and you just believe and you're going to see like amazing things that God is going to do in your life. That could very well be true. I'm not saying it won't. But the reality is that, let me tell you something. The guy that's preaching that, the woman that's preaching that, they don't know that for a fact. As a matter of fact, I would say that, I've lived long enough and been a pastor long enough to know that a lot of times that's not the case. Like a lot of times life doesn't always get better immediately. Sometimes it gets hard. Sometimes it gets much harder. Sometimes we think that there is no way things could get worse. And here you go, and then things get worse. Like 2020 to 2021, probably a great example that no, there's no way like the writers of 2020 have any more plot twists, and 2021 shows up with all the craziness that we had last year. You see what I'm saying? So my tendency a lot of times is to try to, with whatever words of comfort I can offer, that they don't have like that empty hope, that's just like positive thinking of like, just keep digging at it and things are gonna get better. But there is also an inherent danger in that kind of preaching, and the inherent danger is that basically for you no hope. Not me, but God, right? Like basically Jesus comes into the world and God joins us in our pain, and that's it, right? And our pain continues and the suffering continues. And this is the thing, there's a very kind of like a thin line between God being with us in the midst of our pain, being a source of comfort, and actually that also becoming a source of almost resentment toward God. Because if this God is powerful and if this God loves us, is he really just sitting around watching us suffer? That's, by the way, the Job line. Yeah, you tireless watcher of humanities. I'm fascinated that kind of language makes its way into scriptures. But part of what's going on there is like it's an expression of the writers of the scriptures that sometimes it feels like God is just watching as we suffer. And if that's the case, well, that wouldn't be that good of a God, would it? Right? But perhaps the best example is to think about it like this. Imagine that you have a friend that loves you, that's your best friend, that's incredibly wealthy, and that that doesn't have a need for a lot of his resources, and they're just sitting there and has connections with every single thing that you can think about, and they are watching you suffer through some of the worst things, and they could do something about it. They could provide. If you're struggling financially to pay rent and you're gonna keep out your house, they could take care of that, without giving a thought. Maybe you have a friend that has all of the, knowledge in medicine, and you cannot afford a doctor, and they could help you, but for some reason they won't. But it's not like they're just aloof. They're sitting with you and they're hanging out with you and they're saying, "I'm so sorry, you're going through this," but they don't do anything. At some point, there's a moment where like the comfort of your friend being there, it can turn into bitterness, because like can you see my life? Can you see what's going on? You could do something about this if you wanted. Like, in a way, believe it or not, if we only think that God is just sitting us with there and watches us suffer, our thinking of God can become like that. It's happened to me, to be honest with you. There have been moments in my life of faith, in my walk, that I'm like, God, can you see that I am in excruciating pain? And that I have no idea how I'm going to get out of this. And you're just sitting there. Why won't you do something? And what I want to share with you today, though, is that that's not the full story of what God has done through Jesus in the Christmas story and in the life of Jesus and the death and resurrection of Jesus. That part of what the Christmas story means is not only that God comes into the world as Emmanuel, as God with us, to be with us and to offer us comfort, but actually that comes into the world to do something other pain. And I want to read you a passage, and this is actually a passage from before the birth of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. If you're familiar with the story of John the Baptist is Jesus' cousin, and John the Baptist's parents actually, like, John is born before Jesus. So, like, the beginning of the Gospel of Luke actually opens with the story of the prophecy about John the Baptist, and then his birth. And the story is like this man Zechariah, who is one of the priests at the temple. The year that it's his turn to serve at the temple, he has this encounter with God in the temple, who tells him that his wife is going to become pregnant, even though they're of very old age, and that this son that he's going to have is going to be John the Baptist, and he was going to prepare the way for Jesus. And Zechariah doesn't believe the messenger from God, and as evidence that the messenger of God is telling the truth, he says, you're not going to be able to say another word until your son is born. And that's what happens. He goes back home, he tells his wife, somehow communicates to his wife what's happened, and he can't talk. He's mute all of his wife's pregnancy. And then when John the Baptist is born, kind of like the very first thing that he does, he's kind of like breaks into song. At least that's how the text presents it, right? Like, he tells people they don't know what name they're gonna name John, and the very first thing he can say is that his name is going to be John, and everybody marvels at that. And then he like breaks into this song. And it's kind of like a musical. Like, we went to see West Side Story over the break, and everybody's like randomly singing. That's kind of what's happening in the passage. And there's a line in that song. It's Luke chapter 1. I just want to read you a couple verses. Verse 76. It says, "And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High. For you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace." Now, what does this have to do with Jesus? Well, because in this song that Zechariah sings, he's kind of like speaking to his son that's going to be born, John. But he's actually singing about the one that John is preparing the way for, which is Jesus Christ. And he's saying that the coming of Jesus, the language that he uses is incredible. He says, he's going to be like the rising sun that coming to us from heaven, says, shining on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, guiding our feet into the path of peace. It's incredible language. And it's incredible language because it's a language that talks about the coming of Jesus making a real difference in the world and making a real difference in the lives of the people of Israel. And that's just what I want to kind of like hopefully help you see for a second, that one of the things that Christians believe is that the birth of Jesus, the coming of Jesus, has made a real difference in the world. Like, there was a time in the history of Israel where all that Jesus was a promise. A promise that one day God was going to do something, until the moment when Jesus was born. And Jesus lived, and Jesus dies, and Jesus resurrects. That one of the core idea of Christianity is that these are events that happen. Like I don't believe that the stories of the birth and death and resurrection of Jesus are metaphors or fables or myths or analysis of some sort of. Actually believe they're true. And the reason why that's important, kind of like in the framework of Christianity, is because that becomes kind of like the anchor for the hope that Christians have. What I mean by that is that, going back to what we're talking about, during Christmas, if all that Jesus is kind of like a presence to comfort us, right? It's just like God kind of like somehow God spiritually becoming present with us and being with us in our pain. That's great. But the thing, that doesn't really change anything about reality. It helps us go through it better, which is important, I guess, but doesn't really give us any source to like hope for anything better, right? And the thing is that from the kind of like beginning of like the Christian communities, after the resurrection of Jesus, those communities were guided by something way bigger than that. Like they really had this hope that God had done something, and that because God had done that thing, that all of the other promises that God had made were one day going to come to pass. That God was going to one day put an end to suffering and pain in the world. And that, kind of like if that was true in the macro sense, that somehow in the micro sense, in their own lives, that also made a difference. Like they could believe that God could heal them. They could believe that God could provide for them. They could believe that God could act in some ways miraculously and intervene in their lives. And the source of all that belief was the fact that they believed that Jesus had come into the world. And the reason I'm telling you this is because if all I had was the hope of the comfort on God, that's a good thing, again, as I said, but that's not all I have. Like what I believe, and what I was worried that maybe what wouldn't have fully come across on Christmas Eve, is that it's not only that God joins me in my pain or my suffering, but somehow in ways that I don't understand, in ways that sometimes it doesn't feel like it, doesn't look like it, that God is already, because of Jesus, doing something in the world that one day will change my reality. I'll change my reality in a number of ways, right? One is that it will change my reality in my eternity. That I really believe that, the coming of Jesus, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, it means eternal life. It means salvation. It means resurrection. It means that all of the ways in which the world is broken right now are not going to last forever. That the pain and the suffering and the sin, like all of these things that right now break our hearts when we look at the news, when we talk to the people that we love, when we see suffering around us, like all those things will change. And it's not just like a spiritual change, it's a real, tangible, physical change. Like the point of the resurrection is just saying, I'm redeeming this material world and everything that's in it. And that's kind of like the core key hope for Christianity, right? And listen, if it's there, if that's just it, if like, hey, nothing in this life is going to ever change or ever get better, but this thing is going to happen in the long run, that gives me hope. That helps me keep going, because I believe that eventually I will see things change and things get better. But this is the thing. What the early followers of Jesus believed, and what the followers of Jesus have believed for 2,000 years, is that if Jesus was born into the now world, so to speak, right? The world pre-God returning, pre-Jesus putting everything to right. If Jesus was born into the now world, if Jesus died in the now world, if Jesus resurrected in the now world, that means that somehow that goodness, that thing that God is going to do in the future, is through Jesus kind of like seeping in through the now world, through the church. That goodness from the future is kind of like seeping in through the now world, through the Holy Spirit and the work of God. In other words, that it's only that we can have hope for then, but that we can have hope for now. And it's not a hope that everything just fixes itself up, becomes a utopia, because that's what we believe, that that's the thing that God is going to accomplish in the future. But that somehow now, in the midst of our pain, that we can believe and hope and expect forgot to do something, forgot to move. The reason why early church people prayed to God asking them to heal their sick wasn't just because they were superstitious or because it was like an empty room. It's because they believed that God had the power to heal their sick. The reason why, early Christians prayed to God to provide for them was because they believed that God had the power and the will to provide for them. When they prayed for protection, when they prayed for strength, all of the life of Christians is a life of believing that the goodness of God has entered into our reality now. And what that means then is that we can believe and we can hope that things will get better. I don't fully know how. I don't fully know what that entails. A lot of times doesn't look like I would want it to look. But in the same way, there's something about the goodness of God that we can hope for and believe and expect to be a part of our lives on this side of eternity. There's one of my favorite lines in the Psalms, comes from Psalm 27. Verse 13 says, I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. That the psalmist believe, listen, I believe that there's a resurrection. And I believe there's a future hope that God will put everything to right. And listen, that's a greater hope. Like, that's the most important thing. And you've heard me preach, if you've heard their sermons before, you've heard me talk about this ad nauseum probably. But sometimes there's a way in which we can kind of like say, okay, we can guarantee that future hope, and we can guarantee like that we can experience God's comfort and presence and peace. And in the middle of that, because life is so hard and because life is so complex and so messy, we don't want to look bad believing that something could change and then it doesn't change. Or we don't want to give people empty hope saying, hey, all of your problems are going to be swept away, which is wise, but it's very easily then to fall into a trap of not offering any hope. That basically life might be hard the rest of your life. Sorry, God's with you. And sometimes that is the case, but that's not how the writers of the Bible think about God. That's not how Jesus talks about his Father. That's not how the New Testament Christians believed in God. Like, they really had this faith and hope and belief that God could act on their behalf, that God could move, that things would get better, that suffering wouldn't last forever, that pain wouldn't last forever, that in the midst of whatever the darkest of circumstances that they were facing, that they would see the goodness of God in the land of the living. I follow on Twitter this couple. I want the university to take their privacy, kind of like a Christian writer, and his first wife died of cancer, and eventually he ended up remarrying to a woman whose husband also died. So they were both, we were sometimes kind of like happy people that have the same life experience. So they got remarried, and this year they welcomed to the world a baby, and I was really happy to see that for them, and they were posting about it, and I think it was early this morning actually. The wife posted a picture of their baby, and she comments, and she says like, the goodness of God in the land of the living. A few weeks ago, when the baby was born, the husband had posted and just saying, listen, like I'm very familiar with pain and with suffering. But he's holding his child. He's saying, I think I'm going to camp out on the land of goodness for a little bit. And today he was also mentioning how for him, hospitals were always associated with death and with pain, because that was his experience during his wife's cancer. But now his freshest memory of a hospital is not a memory of pain. It's a memory of what? Of life. You see that? the goodness of God in the land of the living. That the Bible doesn't promise anybody that all of our problems are going to magically disappear. The Bible doesn't promise anybody that, listen, all the things that you struggle with in this life, that one day all of them will just go away, and your ideal of prosperity and blessing, that will happen, and the things that you struggle with will just, stop being a problem. It does promise the goodness of God in the land of the living. And what that means is, at least what I have to believe it means. I could be wrong. I could be monumentally wrong on this, but I don't really think I am. And also, like, this is just how I've decided to live my life, believing that things will get better. I may never be rich. I may never, have all of the things I want, but things will get better. In the darkest moments, in the moments where things seem the hardest and most difficult, things will get better. I will see the goodness of God in the land of the living. I've shared before my experience with the passage from Zechariah that I read to you when we were starting our church planting journey. I was about to start this year-long residency at another church, and the way it worked is that you had to, raise part of your salary through monthly financial support from other people, kind of like if you're a missionary. And the thing was about to start, and we're like hundreds of dollars a month short of the amount of money that we needed, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And for weeks now, I was praying, and at that moment, my devotional life, I was using the Book of Common Prayer, like the daily office from the Anglican tradition. And what it is basically is a lot of like Bible readings that you just repeat day after day after day after day. One of those readings is something called the Benedictus. And the Benedictus is actually the song of Zechariah that we read today. In a slightly different translation, but it's basically that, right? So like every day for weeks I'm reading this thing. And in one of kind of like the opening prayers, like, one of the things that the prayer book says is this idea, one line from this passage, right? It says, in the tender compassion of our God, says, the dawn from on high shall break upon us. And it's just part of the line. And you repeat that as a refrain throughout your morning prayers for weeks, right? And I've been praying this for weeks. And the weekend before I'm about to start my residency, I just have this moment of this crisis of faith. And I'm like, just breakdown crying, like, God, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I believe that you sent us here. I believe that this is your will. I have no idea how I'm going to face this. And two things happened over that weekend. A good friend came to visit me. That he had just moved closer to our area. We didn't know anybody at that point. We didn't know who was gonna kind of like be part of like our early church core team. And he says, "Hey, me and my wife moved. Took me out for a drink." And he's like, "Hey, man, like I just want you to know we're excited for you guys to start. Want to be a part of that." And that was like this jolt of like adrenaline and hope in a really dreary week. And then a friend of us mailed us a check exactly for the amount that we needed for that month. Incredible. And I'm very grateful, praying, whatever. Monday comes along, and I'm having a crisis of faith right away again, right? Because I'm like, God, like, yes, you provided for this month, but like, we still have like, a year left of this. What are we going to do? Where's money? Like, just this profound anxiety and fear. And in the middle of the prayer, my friend calls me on the phone, and I think probably did the wrong thing, but like, you send us a check covering like a lot of like, or need for that month. I'm gonna take your call. So like I take my friend's call, interrupting my prayer time, and my friend just wanted to make sure that I received the check and just wanted to tell me, hey, like, listen, we want to continue doing this for your residency. And I can't believe that I'm hearing that, just like tears coming down my face. And I go back to praying, and I had stopped right before reading this passage, and I'm reading it, and I get to that line, like, in the tender compassion of our God, dawn from on high shall break upon us. And listen, very few times do I feel like God speaks to me. And when I say God speaks to me, it's not like I hear a voice, like an angel shows up. It's just kind of like, basically like this thought that I have in my head that I know I didn't come up with that thought. Kind of like Inception type deal. At least that's the way I experience it. Other people experience it in a different way. But I felt that the thing that God was telling me was, You know what your problem is, Joe? Like, no, God, I don't know what my problem is. What's my problem? Many problems, but and I feel like I was telling me your problem is that you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. No matter what blessings you experience, no matter what good things you experience, you don't expect goodness. You expect things to go wrong. And so much of, at least in my case, my anxiety and my fear and all of my emotional issues stem out of that. This constant belief. Listen, part of that's like the immigrant experience. Like, you're an immigrant, you're always, even if you've immigrated legally and have all your paperwork in order and everything is right, you're always afraid you're gonna get kicked out. That somebody's gonna change the laws and you're gonna get kicked out, and that's just like a constant anxiety. And I don't know if that's why, but it's true. Like, I'm always expecting for things to go wrong, even in the midst of the greatest news. I begin to worry. And I feel like I was saying, like, Zechariah is writing this song before John the Baptist is born, before Jesus is born, having no full concept of the thing that Jesus was going to do in the world, believing that the promise of this child, that the fact that John had been born, it meant that God kept his promises. And if that was true, then the Son was going to come out. And my question to you is, well, what if that's true for us? What if we look at the Christmas story not only as this metaphor, not only as this, nice thought of God being with us in our pain and suffering, which is important, but also as the evidence that God kept his promises. There was a time where Jesus hadn't been born and God promised that Jesus would be born, and Jesus was born. There was a time where Jesus hadn't died for our sins, but Jesus has died for our sins. And there was a time where Jesus was dead, but Jesus is now alive. Do you see it? Like, all of these things that we believe, if they're true, then they're just not these nice stories meant to give us comfort. They're also evidence of God's goodness and something that happened in this life, in the now, that we have seen the goodness of God in the land of the living. And if we have seen it, we can hope that we will see it again. There's this famous theologian named Jürgen Moltmann, and he writes a lot on the concept of hope, and he says this. He says, we become active insofar as we hope. He says, we hope insofar as we can see into the sphere of future possibilities. We undertake what we think is possible if, for example, we hope that the world will continue to be as it is now. We shall keep things as they are. If we hope for an alternative future, we shall already change things now as far as possible in accord with that. What Jürgen Moltmann is talking about is not manifesting. It's not just, hey, if you wish for the right thing and believe that you're going to get it, it's going to somehow mystically come to pass. What Jürgen Moltmann is saying is like, listen, hope or lack thereof, it's kind of like a limiter in our lives. It's probably a silly example, but let's say you're single and you like somebody and you want to ask them out. If you don't believe that you have a chance of them saying yes to you, you're probably not going to ask them out. It doesn't matter whether they want to go out with you or not. If that idea is there, then you'll never take any steps. And part of what Jürgen Moltmann is saying, like lack of hope limits our lives. Limits the steps we take, limits the moves we make. It's almost like we need a hope to fuel our future. And the hope that we have as Christians is not just empty hope. It's not just positive thinking. It's not just optimism. It's real hope. It is the hope that Jesus is real, that Jesus was born, that Jesus lived, that Jesus died, that Jesus resurrected. And if that's true, then we shall see the goodness of God in the land of the living. And the steps that we take are guided by that hope. And the reason why I'm sharing all of this with you is because if you're like me, hope you're not, if you're anything like me, you're afraid of hoping for anything better for 2022 because you hope for something better in 2020 and you know what happened. And then you hope for something better in 2021. You know what happened again. And it's just at some point that wears on us. And it's true on the larger scale of things. A lot of times it's true in our personal lives, in relationships, in career, in work, in our walk with God, in every aspect of our lives. And so many of us, after the 2 years that we've had, we're weary and we're battling down and we're worn out. And it's so hard to even imagine that things will get better. And the question I have for you is, do you believe that the stories of Jesus are true? Put away everything else. Put away anything about your own life, your own experience. When we talk about Jesus, you're tuning into this. You have to have some interest in Jesus, I would hope, to be watching this. Do you believe that Jesus was a real person that was born? And that he was a real person that died? And that he was a real person that resurrected? If you believe that, that's the core evidence of God's goodness in the land of the living. That God has done something in history in the now. And if God did that, if God kept his promises then, why not trust him and believe that things will get better? I have no idea the full extent of what that means. I have no idea if the things that you've been struggling with for years will stop. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know if that particular relationship would heal itself. I really don't. I don't want to offer empty promises. At the same time, I look at the scriptures and I look at God and look at what God has done, and God says that we will see his goodness in the land of the living. And I have to cling to that hope. And I get up in the morning believing in that. And I, take the steps of faith that I take in my life, believing in that. I love my wife and my son, believing in that we shall see the goodness of God in the land of the living. Because if we weren't, what are we even doing here? Friends, my hope as we enter now 2022, is that this is a year where we see the goodness of God in the land of the living. And I believe that not just out of sheer optimism, not just out of sheer positive thinking. I believe that because I believe in the Christmas story. Because I believe that roughly 2,000 years ago, this teenage girl and her carpenter husband had a baby. And that has made all the difference in history. So, my friends, may you see the goodness of God in the land of the living this year. Grace and peace.